Siaradwr arall, dan ni sef Dr Simone Lowthe-Thomas, sydd cydlynydd rhaglen Cynefin. Mae Simone yn bennaeth ynni cymunedol yn asiantaeth ynni Hafren Gwy.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here today to talk to you a little bit about Cynefin and the programme and what we've been doing across Wales. Thank you for that introduction. As it said, I manage the programme with, I should say, Welsh Government, and I also work for Severn Wye Energy Agency, as head of their community energy there. Let's see if this works now. Yes. Okay, so I'm just going to go through a little bit of background to Cynefin, for those of you who don't know about it. I wasn't sure, and a little bit about how the programme is structured, where we're working and how we're working, and then maybe just look at some key learning that I think would probably be relevant to town and community councils, particularly with the Future Generations Bill and some of the work going around Wales You Want and wellbeing at the moment. It's been through a number of ministers, so there has been some changes in the programme, and it has been described as a change programme, both because we are looking at new ways of working for Welsh Government and changing, but also because the programme is learning and adapting as it goes along. It's very much a work in progress. It's primarily about tackling poverty and looking at how we can use our resources, and that might be the time, people, places, what makes our places special, to improve quality of life, to improve well-being for our communities. We're looking at how we can deliver sustainable development on the ground, and can we look at new ways of doing that through joined-up working, through working in partnership. There's three sort of main aims for the programme. The first is around place. So we actually want to deliver better places. We want to improve quality of life. We want to look at how we can link people to their environment and create jobs and well-being. Secondly, we want to look at process, looking at how we can be flexible, how we can be opportunistic. Can we work in a more collaborative way? It's not terribly new. Welsh Government is saying that it's new for them, I guess. Programmes like the RDP, Planed, Crew have all worked in a place-based way, but the department we're working in with the Welsh Government has traditionally funded everything very much in sort of silos, some excellent pieces of work, but often unable to work together. And so this programme is really looking at where those things come together is the place. So can we work together in place with a sort of place plan to try and add value and improve those services that we provide. And one of the key things really for me about the programme is it's very much about collecting evidence and informing policy. That might be local policy, it might be a Welsh Government policy. It's looking at where we have policy drivers and where we have potentially policy barriers, and really about the infrastructure provided by those policies and how we can make those more efficient and improved. We're also attempting and succeeding, I think, to work co-productively and across departments. I mentioned earlier the Future Generations Bill. We've been extremely active in feeding into the Wales You Want consultation, which I hope many of you have been involved with or are aware of. We also work very closely with partners such as Communities First, looking at tackling poverty in some of our most deprived areas. The last couple of years we've been linking in with the planning bill, the environment bill, and really looking at how that affects community and how those sort of policy drivers should include community engagement more. In terms of the town and community councils, I think there's a lot of learning out there about this approach, about how you can engage with the communities more effectively, how we can evaluate some of the excellent work we're doing and learn from it, and how we can be more accountable for what we're doing. Also looking at co-production and collaborative working. So how do we do that? Or how do we try to do that as a model? At the moment we have 9 place coordinators across Wales. They started most of them in 2013, so have been going for about 18 months. We started off looking at primarily at urban areas. That was the direction of the minister at the time. So a lot of our places are along the M4 corridor, but I'll come on to where we're working later. It's managed by a partnership between Welsh Government and Severn Wye Energy Agency, and I'm the coordinator for Severn Wye. And we have 6 of our place coordinators employed by Severn Wye. And quite importantly, the other 3 are all employed and seconded to the programme by other organisations working within the department, because we can't really test a joined-up way of working unless we're delivering it in a joined-up way and working across lots of different organisations. So we're working also very closely with the local authorities, and 6 of our place coordinators actually hosted by a local authority. which gives them a real good insight into the services provided and how they can influence those. I think it's quite important to stress that independence of these place coordinators. They're not Welsh Government employees, they're not, nor are they local authority. They work independently and impartially, which gives them a sort of a freedom, really, to be able to be quite flexible in what they do. But also, they can go and ask some very challenging questions pretty much wherever they want. So it's quite a challenging role for them, but quite empowering for them to, and on behalf of the community. Just to give you a little bit of background to the governance of the programme, we have an advisory group, which is quite a large group, mostly with different policy leads, but also a lot of the organisations that work across environment and sustainable development, health, food, all the transport, all those sorts of linked organisations. And that's a really useful forum to talking about how we can work in a more joined-up way. We also have a place leadership group, which is led by Peter Davis, the Commissioner, which is a higher level group, really lots of academics, lots of people working around place across Wales to bring together some of the learning, not just about Cynefin, but place-based work across Wales. And finally, just wanted to flag up the evaluation that we've been working on, because it's really quite unique and it's taken us best part of a year to develop a way that we can model this sort of work. How can we monitor what we're doing? It's on various scales, the data is not always available, and we have to make sure the data is meaningful, and I think we've got some really interesting learning that we can share about that over the next year. And I'll come on to that a little bit more later. So this is where we're working, in case you don't know. We started off with, as I said, some very urban areas, and we've been able to expand. So for last year, we've actually had a place coordinator in Anglesey. We've got one in Cardiff who's been in place for 18 months, mostly working around the city centre. In Carmarthenshire, our place coordinator, Aled, there, has been working with Llanelli very closely, and including with the Town Council. In Merthyr, we have a project that's actually running across the whole area at the moment. We've got one area in Newport, Maindee, in Newport Talbot. We're working with two areas that are mostly working with the RSL there and Communities First. In RCT, we're working across the whole area. Swansea, we're working, there's a spelling mistake here, it's the Penderry ward, not Pearderry. And in Wrexham, we're working on a number of things across the whole area, but also in two specific areas, Kaya Park and Kevin Mauer. Some of those have town and community councils, some don't, but where they do, we're trying to work very closely with them. And we've also worked very carefully to make sure that our place coordinators are matched to their place, and they have quite a wide range of skills. Here they are. I thought you were a bit sick of looking at me, so a picture of some of them. I guess I just wanted to say at this point that it all sounds quite grandiose and out there and very high level. And the question that I was faced with 2-3 years ago when I met with David and a few others looking at this before Cynefin started was, how on earth do you deliver something like that, and who do you find to deliver it? They found me to deliver it, and we're still working on how you deliver it. It's very much a new programme, and we're really challenging how we deliver. I'm just going to go through a little bit of background about how we started. When we first started, we were given 1 year to prove ourselves, and 1 year to prove yourself on how you deliver sustainable development is a bit of an oxymoron, really, but we had a go. The first stage was a really, really thorough induction to all the place coordinators about the policies, the drivers, what funding was available out there, because then when they went into their communities, they were able to be informed about what opportunities there were. They worked very, very closely with the local authorities, but also all the stakeholders and organisations across their areas to really understand what was already happening in their areas, what was the best practice, where there were challenges, where there were barriers, what was happening that was really good, to get a really good overview. We then spent some time working with those partners to decide where within the local authority areas we were going to target the work for the pilot, and then started working very closely with the communities to look at visioning and planning and finding out what people wanted. And as a result, we set up these thematic groups and place groups in each area to develop local plans, place-based work, with short-term targets at first. We had a year, so we had to do some low-hanging fruit and get some deliverables. We've had a 2-year extension, so we've got another 18 months now. So we've got some longer-term plans in place. So what do they actually do? It's quite a varied role, as I said. They all come to us with very different skills. I've put facilitating rather than doing. They don't come with a big pot of money, so they don't go into a community and say, we're going to do this and do a project. They actually go in and support the people that are already there, linking up. The people like myself are paid officers that don't necessarily always have time to go and link and do the networking that you need to do. they inspire. They go out and find out what's happening elsewhere and share it with the communities, engaging across sectors. So they'll work with the private sector, they work with the universities and the academics, the public sectors, and very much looking at working together. I put co-pro question mark. Co-production is a word that's been bandied around an awful lot at the moment. I would say we collaborate and we try to work co-productively. Whether we follow the strictest model of co-production, I don't know. It's quite pioneering. We have to be quite brave. We're going out there and often challenging the norm and saying, can we do things differently? Is there another way of looking at this? You know, we've got less resources, but we have time and we have some fantastic places. And discovering the assets that we have in the communities is really important. And the way that they can do this role, I think, is because they come without a funding pot. It gives them that freedom. They're not tied down by specific indicators or targets they have to reach to earn that money. They come completely open to tailor what they're delivering in their community to what the needs are in that area and what's wanted in that area. And so what we've ended up with is a real broad variety of different projects happening across Wales, which is quite interesting and quite exciting. And so to counteract that, I've tried to summarise what we've done. So I've come up with themes, although... so there's a lot of them working on different aspects of energy. In poverty areas, fuel poverty is obviously a huge issue. We've been linking it with programmes such as NEST and ECO, looking at environmental energy efficiency improving, looking at the housing stock, looking at particularly at waste as well in some areas, also looking at renewable energy and working with OVW and the Welsh Government programmes there to support renewable energy. Food, access to food and growing spaces and outdoor spaces, a very broad theme, but very, very common to be tackled. It may be just access to food in some of our most deprived areas. In other areas, it's about growing food and looking at more healthy eating and linking with the schools and the youth. Access to green space, as I said, in some of our more urban areas, and linking that to health objectives, particularly with the concerns about ageing populations and youth inactivity. Flooding and emergency planning is an area that's come up across nearly all of our areas now. Some of our most deprived areas, there's a real issue about equality and these areas being very, very vulnerable to emergencies, whether it be planning, flooding, heat. So how we can work with communities to develop models of emergency response, but then also long-term looking at adaptation and empowering them to be more resilient to these sort of impacts. And finally, supporting social enterprises. There's some fantastic social enterprises out there being really sort of entrepreneurial in their approach around tourism or looking at what resources they have, things around waste, recycling, and food, all those sorts of things. So linking them up with some support and mentoring across the private sector. And finally, more recently, I've just added on, asset transfer in a lot of areas, looking at what assets they have and working with the local authorities on that. Just a picture to break up the boring monotony of the slide. So those are some of the sort of things we've been doing around renewables, looking at hydro, wind, engaging with schools, those sorts of things. And again, looking at flooding, looking at resilience planning, and as I said, not just looking at the immediate response, which might be engaging with the service sector and looking at building up community responses, but also looking long-term about how we can adapt and become more resilient to the challenges that we're facing from environmental and climate change. Okay, so I'm just going to whiz through. I'm going to whiz through a few examples. I'm not going to do all 9 areas for you, you'd be pleased to hear. But I've chosen 1 or 2 that have got different examples. So in Wrexham, as I mentioned earlier, we've got one thematic thing. So really going across the Wrexham, looking at energy, and quite an active environment and energy group's been established, working with OVW, but also working with the university there, looking at wind options, hydro options, and looking at bulk buying of photovoltaics for the area. We've also been working there with the local authority, looking at setting up some time banking. And actually time banking is becoming increasingly common, and a great deal of interest about time banking across Wales as a really useful tool for engaging with communities. We've been working with social enterprises in Kaya Park. Kaya Crafts is a wood group that supports people with mental illnesses and learning disabilities, and to make crafts and looking at helping to make their businesses more sustainable, for an example. And also working with tourism and heritage, and in Severn Wye we've been working very closely with various social enterprises and the DTA and things there, looking at how we can support them to develop their tourism industry. Over in Cardiff, Very, very different community area there, extremely transient population. It's a high-density population full of students, mostly rented accommodation. And what we found is they're really lacking a really strong sense of community in some of those areas. So some of the things we've done there is sort of what you might call quick wins to really sort of try and engage the community, build community capacity and confidence. Active travel's come up. There's an issue with parking and it's very, very busy, so looking at how we can make it safe for pedestrians, but also for cyclists, looking at better signage, bike racks and so on. Food and growing. We've used food in this area particularly to try and gel the community together. We've had a very successful food festival which engaged all the different, there's a high street there with lots and lots of different cuisines, countries from all around the world, and we had an amazing food festival, brought those businesses together that wouldn't normally work together to coordinate and run an event, which has resulted in them now looking at setting up some sort of business federation or chamber of commerce. Last weekend, they did a 101 metres graffiti wall, an enormous wall. It's a bit of a barrier in the area, very much an eyesore, and something that the youth wanted to do. They had 10 professional graffiti artists come along and work with the community to do it. It's quite fantastic display. Also looking at waste, working with the university and the students and Keep Wales Tidy to look at how we can manage waste in the area. If you imagine there's an awful high density of people living in quite a small area with small gardens and lots of wheelie bins everywhere. So how can we manage waste and look at recycling in those areas? I'll move on. In Llanelli, I mentioned Llanelli earlier. It's we've been doing some really pioneering work there with the Town and Community Council, but also all the service providers across Llanelli, looking at the emergency planning. Starting off looking at winter planning and resilience for the elderly, and the Llanelli we want as part of the Future Generations Bill consultation, but then expanding onto adaptation and looking at resilience and actually testing some of the emergency plans. So a really interesting piece of work there. And finally, in Merthyr, we've just had a meeting last week with a range of practitioners looking at how we can help the local authority and other service providers tackling health issues in the area, obesity and smoking, two very important issues in that area, and linking the community who don't feel linked to the fantastic resource of their outside that they have. So they have Bike Park Wales and all the outside environments and Come Outside, and Natural Resources Wales programme has been working very closely in that area to provide lots of outdoor services and activities, but how we can possibly set up a mechanism to link GP referrals to the outdoors, so it's not just going to a gym, and encourage people to make the most of their environment. And we went to visit a fantastic Prince's Trust programme in Burnley where they've done just that, and we brought learning from that to Wales. So that's just a few examples of what we've been doing. Obviously, there's a lot of learning. We've got a range of projects, a range of work, and it's all been evaluated and monitored. But communicating that's really important. So part of that is working at a policy level, going back to Welsh Government, going back to local authorities and saying where there's drivers, where there's barriers or challenges to us being able to work with the communities and the service providers to deliver. All the place coordinators monitor very closely their work, and they also have action learning or action research sessions. They feed in back on a sort of 3-month cycle about what they're learning and what they can take away then to adapt their practices. That feeds into the independent evaluation, and we're hoping to have a report about that within the next 6 months. And obviously it feeds back into all our leadership and advisory groups, and through social media and the website and so on. I'm just going to finish with a few facts and figures. I apologise, these are a bit out of date. This is from our first year's evaluation, so we've had another 6-7 months on top of these, but there's already been £100,000 secured by the communities for action. I think that's more like 150-200,000 now, and we actually have some very big bids in, so we're sort of starting to lever in some support. We've established over 100 relationships between communities and service providers, and we're working with well over 1,000 organisations and individuals across Wales now, setting up working groups in the local authorities and local areas, but also then providing and producing delivery plans, which then we have the mandate and we have the sort of accountability for the work that we're doing in those areas. Well over 6,000 hours have been contributed to the project, and that might be from volunteer time, but also from other organisations or private sector donating us time and sometimes money as well towards the work. And finally, we've got 2 new place coordinators, hopefully starting in January. One is going to be based in the Llandryn Wells, and they're going to look at sort of that area and its surrounding area, probably looking at some more rural issues. And then also in Tredegar, which we're hoping we can work very closely with the crew and look at the work that you'll be hearing about later from Dave around that. So finally, I just wanted to say that we've got an awful lot of experience that we can share with you around evaluation and about how you can improve the well-being of your communities, and working in collaboration with the communities, but also all the other organisations that are across your areas, about how you can build a mandate and a vision, and then how you can evaluate that to be accountable for your actions. And that's about it, really. I just have one slide. Can I? I have one slide just on, take my different hat off and put my Severn Wye hat on just for a moment, please. Severn Wye, as an independent energy agency, we've just won a bid with a consortium of social enterprises to deliver a Welsh Government resource efficiency support service, and it will be for the domestic sector and for communities. It's very, very early days, but I just wanted to flag it up to you because it will be able to provide support around energy efficiency and bulk buying and renewables for domestic people. So there'll be some sort of phone line and a hub, but also for communities. So if you have community buildings, or if you're thinking you might like to set something up in your communities for domestic energy efficiency measures or something like that, then just bear that in mind. It will be starting any minute, we hope, and we'll certainly love to work with the town and community councils in your areas. Thank you.